Hi guys, Dale Malik here with Watch the Wear. Thank you for joining me today. So today's topic for our video is vintage chronographs. Are they worth buying? And I have to tell you, I believe so. I think they represent an excellent investment. Look, you can go out and buy stocks, buy bonds, and yeah, you're going to make money if you know what you're doing. Obviously with collecting vintage watches, if you know what you're doing, you can make money as well. But there's a couple different things that I look at in this sense. First of all, when you go out and buy a stock, you really got to watch the thing continuously every day if you want to trade stocks. I trade stocks, so you really have to stay in tune to the market. And if you sleep, or if you snooze, boy, you could lose. Now, collecting vintage watches, in my opinion, first of all, you get to enjoy it. With a stock is an intangible product. It's a piece of paper, so to speak. Anymore, it's not a piece of paper. It's a trade in air on the internet. But anyway, a vintage watch is a tangible product. It's something that you can wear and can enjoy as time goes on, and hopefully you increase your investment. And I believe there's a couple things in play when you look at collecting vintage watches. Not chronographs in particular, but any type of vintage watch. You can collect bubble backs, you can collect a lot of the older Rolexes, the non-chronographs, and Omegas, they all go up in value. But I think you got to look at obviously a couple different things. First of all, you want to make sure you know what you're doing. You got to make sure that the watch is 100% original. And if it does have a new dial, is it an NOS dial, a new old stock dial? I don't think that'll harm the value of the watch. It may a little bit, but it's not going to kill it. It's still technically considered original, at least from my perspective and other watch guys that I talk to. But anyway, you got to make sure and do your due diligence. And there's a lot of different resources today on the internet. For example, when I purchased my Navitimer over here, I posted the picture on the Breitling forum. And there's a couple guys on that forum that are very, very knowledgeable individuals. And it turns out that the one guy that told me about the watch, he was actually the previous owner who sold it to another owner who I ended up buying the watch from. And then he pointed me into the right direction of the watchmaker who I actually contacted. The watchmaker sent me the work order that the watch was serviced, sent me additional pictures, and it checked out. But I did my due diligence. The whole process took me a few days to get it done. But look, in the long run, you got to make sure and do your due diligence before you buy a vintage watch, especially on the internet sight unseen. But anyway, getting back to my point, vintage watches do make an excellent value. Take a look at what's going on in the watch industry. So you got the big groups, you got Fossil and Swatch, and they own the respective brands like Hamilton, Longines, Omega, and Zodiac. Take a look at Zodiac, for example. Look at all their watches. Look how they're reverting back to that vintage style and look. Look at the Hamiltons. Look what Hamilton's doing with the Intramatic, which is supposed to be, and it's a beautiful watch. I actually looked at one, not to digress, but they're going back to the 68 Chronomatic with the Intramatic automatic chronographs. They're beautiful watches. They really are. And Hamilton did an excellent job on it. But like I said, Zodiac, look at all their Sea Wolves, the Sea Dragons, the Jetomatics. They're very beautiful watches that are vintage inspired. Longines, their heritage collection as well, to name a few. Omega, the Seamaster, the Railmaster. They're all going back to that vintage look because it's a sought after look. Even some of the micro brands like Dan Henry. We did a review on the 1964 Gran Turismo. That is a typical watch that took on the style and look of maybe the Breitling Top Time, the Heuer Carreras in the day. But anyway, watchmakers are going back to that. And what's happening from my perspective and in my opinion, obviously, it's driving up the prices on these vintage watches because it's a simple supply and demand economics stance. For example, you got a lot of guys wanting these vintage watches, but there's a lack of supply, so therefore, obviously, the price is going up. Simple economics. Take the Breitling Navitimer. I purchased this watch about 6 years ago, and I more than doubled my price. And quite frankly, I've enjoyed it. I love this piece. And vintage watches, unlike collecting vintage sports cars where they're going to cost you maybe a few $1,000s a year to maintain, a vintage watch, if it's serviced, great. If it's not, well, depending on the condition of the watch. A couple watches that I have that are vintage have never been serviced. I have a 1940s Vulcain from my grandfather. It's never been serviced. I've had the watch for over 20 plus years. I put it on every now and then, and I do wear it, and it keeps time impeccably. It keeps great time. But anyway, even if you're going to get a watch service, what is it, a few $100s every 4 or 5 years? That's it. Just lock them in the safe and enjoy them. But anyway, that's my take. I do believe that they represent an excellent value. I think the value is going to continue to grow as the demand grows and the lack of supply. But without further ado, not to digress too much into this, let's get started with the video. Alright, so what I did is I pulled 2 vintage chronographs from my collection, just to give you an idea what you can expect, what you buy. I tried to do something in an opposite spectrum. Obviously the Breitling Navitimer is a very sought after chronograph from the 1960s, and then the other one is called the Sheffield, which is from the 1960s as well. It does have a very solid Venus 188 movement in it, period correct. Gets a lot of its its look from the vintage watches, from vintage chronographs from the 60s, like the Heuer Carrera. But anyway, 2 different watches. One is more of a aviation pilot's watch, being the Breitling Navitimer, and then the Sheffield would be more of a racing inspired chronograph. But anyway, let's get started with the Sheffield first. Okay, so the first watch we're going to take a look at is a vintage chronograph from the 1960s. The brand name is called Sheffield. Let's go through the dimensions in the case. So we have a polished stainless steel case. It does have a traditional case shape, as you can see. Now the case back itself, flip it over here so you can get a good look of it. It does have a screw-in case back, so it comes open from the back. Now the case size, give you some dimensions here. All right, we're looking at about 36.5 millimeters, and that is without the crown and pushers. Now lug to lug, from one end to the other, from there to there, we're looking at about 44.5 millimeters. The lug width at 18 millimeters, so definitely a very universal lug width there for many different choices with straps. As you can see from some of my videos, I really love the alligator grain or real alligator straps. I just really think it gives the watch a very classy, sophisticated look, for lack of better words. So this watch in particular does not have a sign crown, as you can see there. No sign crown. It does have a thickness of 12.4 millimeters, and we get the 2 chronograph pushers. The top one is going to start and stop the chronograph, and the bottom one will reset the chronograph. Let's see if we can focus in on that. I think right there looks good. It does come with a beautiful acrylic dome crystal, and it's got a smooth bezel, no thrills, very clean look there. So the movement on this watch, put this back there. There we go. So the movement, we're looking at the Venus 188 manual wound movement, 17 joule movement. It's got about a 35-hour power reserve, no date window. It's not hacking, and quite frankly, the water resistance is unknown. So focusing on the dial now, I'm going to try to focus in just a tad. Let's straighten this up just a little bit, if I could. And let's zoom in a tad if we can. Hopefully it'll cooperate and focus for us. I think that looks pretty good right there. So we have a beautiful silver sunburst dial. You get the applied markers with the Arabic numerals at the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and at the 12 o'clock position. It has those beautiful dolphin hands with loom. It does loom a little bit, surprisingly, So our chronograph secondhand is in silver. You can see it ticking away there very nicely. At the 12 o'clock position is the Sheffield call letters. As you can see, above the 6 o'clock position, it says 17 joules, income block with our scripting right there. Now this has two subdials. At the 3 o'clock position is a 30-minute counter. All right. And at the 9 o'clock position is our active seconds. Now on the outermost part of the dial we get our tachometer, and then right below that or inside that we're going to get a telemeter as well. So a very useful watch in that sense, but just a very nice watch. I picked this watch up just to give you a little history. I bought it maybe about a year ago at a NAWCC show up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I got a heck of a deal on it. I do wear it, not a lot, but I do wear it. It fits my wrist very nicely. I'll throw a wrist shot up at the end on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. It's never been serviced, but what I would say is that when the chronograph does run, the watch has a tendency to slow down a little bit, so it is in need of a service. And it's pretty typical for these old chronographs. But if you don't run the chronograph, hey, it keeps great time. But it'll probably be in for a service, or quite frankly, this watch I may be selling. I'm trying to shift my collection in a different direction, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, this is the Sheffield from the 1960s. Okay, so next we are going to take a look at my Breitling Navitimer from 1966. This is reference number 806. So the dimensions in the case. We're looking at a polished stainless steel case. It does have, as you can see, the traditional case design. Now this one opens up from the back. Let's pop it over here so you can turn it over. But as you can see, it does not have a screw-in back, but it does open up from the back. Engraved on the back, I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit. I may need to just position this a little bit better for you. There we go. Let's try that right there. I think that'll work. All right, let's zoom in here so you can get a good, clear, crisp look of it. As long as it stays in focus, we're going to be fine. Very good. I think you can see that nicely now. So engraved in the back is the reference number 806 with our Breitling logo and the scripting stainless steel. So let's zoom back out. Flip it back. Okay, very good. So the case size on this is obviously bigger than the Sheffield. It's a pilot's watch, so they were bigger back then, even in the 60s. The case size on this is 40.5 millimeters, and that is without the crown and pushers. Although from my perspective, I think it wears smaller just because of the slide roll bezel. But anyway, lug to lug, from one end to the watch to the other, from there to there, we are looking at 48 millimeters, just a tad over 48. Lug width, 22 millimeters. It's a pretty good size lug width there. Thickness, it's right around 13 millimeters, maybe just a tad below 13 millimeters. So this one does have a sign crown. Let's see if you can look at that right there. There you go. You can see the Breitling sign crown there. We get the true chronograph pushers, just like the Sheffield. Just like the Sheffield, the top's going to start and stop the chronograph, and the bottom one will reset it. And lay this down there for you. So this one comes with that beautiful bidirectional slide roll bezel. It's in white, as you can see. Now these bezels have a lot of different complications to them. It was a very useful calculation tool in its day, and frankly, even today. But you can do a lot of different things on it, like fuel consumption, altitude, and so on and so forth. There's some excellent articles on the internet where you can really read about the functionality of these slide rule bezels. And it does have a beautiful acrylic crystal. That's domed slightly, but not like the Sheffield. It doesn't have that, I guess, that what you would say like a glass box maybe. Anyway, the movement, let's get rolling with the movement. Here we're going to have the Venus 178 manual movement, a very strong, robust movement, a very sought after movement. 17 joule movement. I timed it. It's got about a 35-hour power reserve, no date window. It does not hack as well. Water resistance is unknown. So the dial, I'm going to focus in a little bit on the dial, so let's just turn it this way. And we are going to straighten it up there a little bit in the centering of it, just so you can get a better look of it. There we go. And I'm going to zoom in. Maybe a little bit more. Think we can get it? There we go. Okay, so the movement, as you can see, it's a matte black dial with white numbers and graduations. Now, it does have lume markers with Arabic numeral at the 12 o'clock position. It really doesn't loom. A little bit. You get a teeny bit. Now, if you watch some of my previous videos, and at the beginning I said this is an NOS new old stock dial. I do have the original dial. I have the original box, and I have the original paperwork, which makes this watch a great investment. Like I said, everything is 100% original. If I want to, I can flop the other dial back in it, but I do have it. So we have an original piece from 1966. We get the stick hands in white with lume. They do lume a little bit. Now the chronograph second hand is in white. So the dial itself with the chronograph at the 12 o'clock position, we're going to have our Breitling logo and the call letters Genève. Although some of these Breitling Navitimers came with the AOPA, that is the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association logo. Obviously mine does not. Above the 6 o'clock position is the call letters Navitimer, and right below the sub 12-hour counter we have the words Swiss Métis. Obviously it's separated by the sub dial. So we get the 3 sub dials. Okay, so at the 3 o'clock position we're going to get a 30-minute counter. At the 12 o'clock position we're going to get a 12-hour counter, and at the 9 o'clock position we're going to get our active seconds dialed there. But as you can see, this watch it's my pride and joy. It's my favorite watch in my collection. Never say never, as James Bond says, or Sean Connery, but I will probably never sell this watch. I really love it. I wear it a lot. I've had it serviced since I purchased it 6 years ago, and I can tell you, getting back to the question, do vintage watches make a great investment? I more than doubled my money, and that is being conservative in nature. I purchased this watch back in 2013, and we're here in 2019 or 2019, and the watch has more than doubled its value. Now, that's what people are selling these watches for on the internet. Look, people can sell whatever they want to sell and ask a price whatever they want to ask for it. Can they get it? Based on current sales, prices that have sold, which you can go on eBay, you can take a look at some different forums and get an idea what watches have sold for. Yes, it's more than doubled its value. So if I was to buy a stock in 2013, would it double today? Maybe, if you do your homework, if you know when to sell and when to get out. And look, like I said, watches to me make an excellent investment because you don't have the volatility that you would have in a market. You buy it, you wear it. If you want to wear it, put it in your safe, wear it, and enjoy it. Stocks, you don't get that. All right, just to wrap things up, I think that, in my opinion, buying vintage watches, vintage chronographs, or any type of vintage watch, if you play your cards right, if you do your due diligence, if you make sure that the watch is original, like I said, NOS is fine, maybe it's going to hurt the value a little bit, but if you do your due diligence, vintage watches make one great investment. They're fun, you get to wear them, you get to enjoy them, as opposed to stocks. You buy it, you really gotta pay attention to the market. The market swings can based on political reasons. The markets can be very volatile based on any type of news or rumors or whatever it is. But from my perspective, buying vintage watches really make an excellent investment. I think you're going to see the value of vintage watches continue to grow. There's a lot of demand for these watches, and there's not that much of a supply. So for the good ones. You can buy a lot of junk out there that's been redialed, that's been molested, but good vintage watches, in my opinion, make an excellent investment. The maintenance on them are very low as opposed to buying a vintage sports car. I've had vintage cars before, I still do. You're going to end up spending, depending on the car, for example, some of my Porsches, I spend anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a year in maintenance on them. And we're talking vintage air-cooled 911s. But anyway, vintage watches, in my opinion, make a great investment. Put them in the safe, wear them, enjoy them, very little maintenance. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Please make sure and follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Please make sure and subscribe to the channel as well. And in closing, make sure that you will always have a watch to wear.